Have you ever stood before a great work of art and felt an echo, not just an appreciation for the artist's skill, but a strange, deep vibration? A feeling that you are looking at more than just oil and canvas, that you are looking at a captured soul? The art world has a name for this. They call it presence. A masterpiece has a life, a weight, a gravity, all its own. But what if that presence isn't just a metaphor? What if it's the signature of a ghost, trapped forever in the work of its own creation? My name is Carlos Mendoza. I have spent my career excavating the stories that lie buried beneath the official histories. And I have learned that the most persistent ghosts are not those who died violent deaths. They are those whose life's work was stolen, whose legacy was erased. An artist, a true artist, pours their very essence into their work. And when that work is credited to another, the spirit doesn't just die, it waits. It stains the canvas. It haunts the pigments. It waits for someone with the right eyes to see the truth hidden in plain sight. The case file I'm about to share with you is perhaps the most subtle and profound haunting I have ever investigated. The story was brought to me by a man of science, a brilliant art chemist, who believed only in what he could prove with data. His investigation began with a search for a chemical anomaly and ended with a confrontation with a ghost. But this was not a ghost that rattled chains or whispered in the dark. This was a ghost that manifested as a single, impossible, beautiful shade of blue. Chapter 1. The Chemical Anachronism. His name was Alex Reyes, and at 28, he was a prodigy, a rising star in the highly specialized world of art conservation. To his peers, he was more chemist than art historian, a man who saw not as a work of genius, but as a complex matrix of organic polymers in a state of slow, predictable decay. He was a purist, a man who trusted data above all else. His near-supernatural ability to decode the chemical history of a painting had earned him the job of a lifetime, a contract with the Prado Museum in Madrid to perform a full molecular analysis on the crown jewel of Spanish modernism, Javier Montes' magnum opus, La Mirada del Mar. To the art world, Javier Montes was a deity, a titan of the early 20th century, a contemporary and rival to Picasso himself, and his 1928 masterpiece, The Gaze of the Sea, was his testament. The painting was valued not in dollars, but in national pride. Alex's job was not to restore it, but to understand it on a microscopic level, to map its chemical DNA and develop a preservation strategy that would ensure its survival for centuries to come. It was a precise, clinical, and prestigious task. It was supposed to be the project that made his career. Instead, it was the project that would break his reality. The first crack appeared on the third day of analysis. Alex was examining the painting's most iconic feature, the deep, luminous, almost otherworldly blue of the sea. It was a color so unique, so vibrant, it was known the world over as Montes blue. He prepared a microscopic sample of the pigment, a fleck smaller than a grain of sand, and placed it into his gas chromatography mass spectrometer. It's a machine that acts like a bloodhound for molecules, capable of identifying the exact chemical fingerprint of any substance. He was expecting the results to show a high-grade lapis lazuli, or perhaps a rare cobalt variant. The results that printed out, however, made his blood run cold. He checked the machine's calibration. Perfect. He ran the test again, on a new sample. The results were identical. He ran it a third time, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The data was unequivocal, and it was absolutely, fundamentally impossible. The chemical signature was for a stabilized chlorinated copper phthalocyanine, a brilliant, powerful, synthetic blue pigment. It was a pigment Alex knew well. It revolutionized the art world with its stability and vibrancy. Its official patent date, a fact as immutable in his world as the speed of light, was 1935. The painting he was analyzing, a work whose history was documented day by day, whose provenance was beyond question, was completed. in 1928. It was a 7-year paradox, a chemical anachronism. It was like finding a smartphone in the wreckage of the Titanic. He immediately understood the cataclysmic implications. If his data was correct, he had just uncovered the greatest art fraud in history. La Mirada del Mar was a fake, a forgery of breathtaking skill, but a fake nonetheless. Such a discovery would make him a legend. But the flip side of that coin was terrifying. If he was wrong, if there was some unknown variable, some catastrophic flaw in his own process, he would be disgraced. His career would be over before it truly began. The man of data was faced with a result that his own logic could not accept. There was only one path forward. He couldn't just analyze the painting. He had to analyze the painter. He had to go to the source, to the alchemical laboratory where this impossible color was born. He had to go to the abandoned, windswept studio of the great Javier Montes. And he had to pray he'd find an answer that didn't destroy his entire understanding of the world. Chapter 2. The Stain of a Stolen Color. The studio of Javier Montes was itself a myth, a place as legendary as the man who occupied it. In the art world, it was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It was his sanctuary, his fortress of solitude, a crumbling masia on the cliffs of the Costa Brava, where he had isolated himself from the world, a place where he famously claimed he was at war with the sea and the sky. The tales said he had made a deal with the landscape itself, trading a piece of his soul for the secrets of its light. The studio had been sealed by his estate upon his death in 1950. Left exactly as it was on the day he died, a perfect time capsule of his genius. After a week of tense, confidential negotiations, the Prado Museum, now deeply unsettled by Alex's impossible data, granted him what only a handful of people in the world had ever received: the key to the studio. He was being sent not just as a scientist, but as a detective, tasked with solving a 70-year-old chemical crime that could rewrite art history. As he drove up that winding coastal road, the bustling modern world of Madrid fell away, replaced by something older, more elemental. He told me later that he felt as though he were driving back in time, toward the scene of a forgotten tragedy. The footage from the small high-definition camera he brought with him is where this story truly begins to bleed from fact into something far stranger. We see him arrive. The air is thick with the smell of salt and wild herbs. The only sound is the roar of the sea below and the cry of gulls overhead. He stands before a massive sun-bleached wooden door, a heavy iron key in his trembling hand. The sound of the key turning in the ancient lock is deafeningly loud, a groan of protest from a place that has held its secrets for a very long time. He pushes the door open, and the first thing that hits him is not the light, but the smell. The air inside, he explained, was a chemical ghost. It was the scent of 100 different volatile compounds, all slowly decaying over 7 decades into a single, complex aroma. Turpentine, linseed oil, Damar varnish. But beneath it all, something else. A sharp, almost electric scent, like ozone, and a faint, cloying sweetness, like wilted flowers. If a memory could have a smell, he said, this is what it would be. The memory of obsessive, feverish creation, tinged with a deep, lingering note of decay. The studio was a masterpiece in its own right, a place perfectly designed for the worship of light. But as Alex began his methodical investigation, the feeling of reverence was slowly replaced by a creeping unease. The place felt wrong. It was a workshop, a place of industry and genius, yet it felt hollow, empty, as if the true engine of its creation had been ripped out, leaving only a beautiful, silent shell. It was here, alone on this cliff top, that Alex, a man of empirical data and rational thought, had the first truly irrational feeling of his life. He felt, with a primal certainty that made the hairs on his arms stand up, that he was not alone, that he was being watched. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to the unsettling quiet and the weight of his task. He had a job to do. He was looking for the master's studio journal, the legendary ledger, where Montes was said to have recorded the formulas for his unique pigments. He found it on the main work table, a thick, leather-bound volume lying open, as if its owner had just stepped away for a moment. Alex sat down in the old wooden chair, the brilliant light from the great window illuminating the pages, and he began his search for the chemical truth of Montes blue. He spent hours poring over the journal. It was a fascinating, frustrating document. Montes's handwriting was an arrogant, powerful scrawl, and the pages were filled with his musings on the nature of color, his disdain for his critics, and his own towering ego. There were chemical formulas, yes, meticulously recorded, but they were all four known pigments of the era: cadmium, yellows, cobalt violets, lead whites. There was no mention of ethylcyanine, no hint of a synthetic blue, nothing. The journal was a dead end. The impossibility of the situation was beginning to close in on him. The data from his lab was impossible. The journal offered no explanation. It was as he sat there, staring at a page of Montes's self-aggrandizing prose, that the haunting began. It was subtle. A flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. A flash of brilliant, luminous blue, like the darting of a tropical fish, in the far corner of the room. He snapped his head up. Nothing. Just dust motes, dancing in the sunlight. A migraine aura, he thought. An optical illusion caused by fatigue and the intense light. He forced himself to focus back on the journal. A few minutes later, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time, more focused. An intense, personal scrutiny. He slowly lifted his head, not toward the room, but toward the massive antique window pane. He saw his own reflection in the old, warped glass. A small, tense man in a vast, empty studio. But for a split second, the reflection was wrong, deeply wrong. In the reflection, the room behind him was not empty. Standing just behind his own shoulder was the clear, unmistakable image of a young woman. She had dark, intense eyes that were not looking at him, but were staring down at the open journal in his hands. Her fingers, reflected in the glass, were stained with a familiar, impossible shade of blue. The vision lasted less than a second. He spun around in his chair, a cry of shock caught in his throat. The studio was absolutely, utterly empty. He was alone, but the scientific certainty that had governed his entire life had just been fractured. He knew, with a terror that went far beyond the rational, that he had just seen the ghost, and she wanted him to find something in that book. Chapter 3: The Ghost's Refraction. There is a unique terror that comes from the complete annihilation of one's worldview. It is a vertigo of the soul. Alex Reyes, a man who had built his entire identity on the bedrock of empirical evidence and rational thought, was now adrift in an ocean of the impossible. The image of the woman in the glass was burned onto his retinas, a ghost in his own optical nerve. It was too clear, too detailed, too real to be a trick of the light. The focused intelligence in her eyes, her gaze directed not at him, but at the journal. It was a detail his own mind could not have fabricated. The next hour of the footage is a portrait of a man at war with himself. He paces the length of the studio, a caged animal. He runs a hand through his hair, muttering to himself, his scientific training desperately trying to reassert control. Reflectional parallax. I hear him whisper on the audio. Atmospheric lensing. Hypnagogic hallucination. He was trying to build a cage of scientific jargon around an experience that defied it. But the cage wouldn't hold. The memory of her ink-stained fingers, the impossible blue that matched the pigment from the painting, was a detail that broke every logical explanation. He told me later that the most terrifying part was the silence. The ghost hadn't whispered his name or rattled any chains. It had simply observed. It had shown itself to him with a quiet, powerful purpose, and then vanished, leaving him alone with the deafening roar of his own shattered certainty. He was on the verge of fleeing, of packing his equipment, driving back to Madrid, and reporting that his initial findings were in error. It would be a professional humiliation, but it would be better than confronting the madness that was blooming in this sunlit, silent room. He grabbed his gear bag, his hands shaking, his only thought to escape, to return to a world that made sense. He was ready to run, but the ghost wasn't finished with him. It couldn't speak, it couldn't touch him, but it was a master of the one thing that filled this entire space: light. As Alex stood with his back to the table, a new phenomenon began. A single focused beam of sunlight, refracted through an old, cobalt blue glass bottle that had been sitting on the windowsill for 70 years, began its slow journey across the room. It was a natural occurrence, the kind of thing that happens every afternoon in a room like this. But the beam of light didn't move randomly. It moved with an unnerving, deliberate precision. The footage shows the beam, now a concentrated point of deep, purplish light, creeping across the dusty floor. It climbs up the leg of the work table. It slides across the scattered notes and sketches, illuminating them one by one. Alex, zipping up his bag, is oblivious. He turns to leave, and that's when he sees it. The beam of light has stopped. It has come to rest on a single, precise spot on the open page of Javier Montes' journal. It forms a perfect, luminous circle of violet light, no bigger than a coin, highlighting a specific, unremarkable passage of Montes' arrogant prose. He freezes. The coincidence is too perfect, too theatrical. This is not a random act of light. This is an act of communication. This is the ghost pointing. Hesitantly, he puts his bag down. He approaches the table, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm in his chest. He leans in, his shadow falling over the book, and stares at the passage illuminated by the spectral light. It's a section from 1927, where Montes is complaining about the rising cost of lapis lazuli. It's meaningless, a dead end. Frustration and fear war within him. Was this just another trick of his own mind? He almost missed it. He was about to turn away when he saw a faint shimmer on the page, directly within the violet circle of light. He leaned closer, holding his breath, and then the second miracle began. Between the bold, black lines of Javier Montes' handwriting, a new text began to emerge. It was a ghost within a ghost. A second diary, written in a delicate, precise hand, in an ink that was completely invisible to the naked eye. An ink that only fluoresced, that only revealed itself when struck by a precise wavelength of ultraviolet light. The kind of light, being perfectly focused by that old blue bottle. The words glowed with a soft, impossible, beautiful blue light. They were like captured starlight, trapped in the fibers of the paper. His scientific mind finally caught up with the supernatural event. This was a sophisticated, masterful use of sympathetic ink, a secret message system hidden in plain sight. This wasn't a haunting. This was an act of masterful, posthumous cryptography, and he, with his knowledge of chemistry and light, was the only person who could have been its intended recipient. His hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the book steady. He angled the journal to keep the beam of light focused on the page. He began to read the secret words of the ghost. The first entry he deciphered was not a plea for help or a cry for vengeance. It was a proud, defiant declaration of creation. He will call it Montes Blue, the glowing text read. He will claim its brilliance as his own reflection, but he does not understand the formula. He does not know that its most important ingredient is not a mineral, but a specific quality of light. He sees a color. I see a revolution. He thinks he is stealing a pigment. He does not realize he has stolen a soul. The sun shifted again. The beam of light moved off the page. The glowing blue words vanished as if they had never been. Alex was left alone again in the silent studio. The ghost of the text now as absent as the ghost of the woman. But everything had changed. He was no longer a scientist investigating a fraud. He was an archaeologist who had just unearthed a hidden testament. He now knew the ghost's name wasn't Montes, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he held in his hands not one journal, but two, and one of them was written by a murderer, and the other by his victim. Chapter 4. The Ghost in the Margins. The terror that had paralyzed Alex just moments before had now been transmuted into a new, powerful fuel, obsession. The scientist within him had finally found a phenomenon he could measure, a mystery he could solve. He was no longer a passive, terrified observer. He was an active participant in a 70-year-old conversation. The ghost had given him the key, and now he was going to unlock every single word, forgetting all sense of time. Ignoring the calls from the museum that he now let go unanswered, Alex worked. The footage from his camera transitions from a record of a haunting to the meticulous documentation of a discovery. He abandoned the unpredictable sunlight and unpacked his own portable, variable wavelength UV lamp. He mounted his high-resolution camera on a tripod, aiming it at the journal. Page by painstaking page, he began the process of exhuming a buried life. Under the cold, sterile purple light of his lamp, the ghost's diary bloomed on every page, a secret garden of glowing blue text woven between the thorny weeds of Montes's ego. He photographed each entry, his methodical process at odds with the explosive, heartbreaking story that was revealing itself to him. The delicate cursive belonged to a young woman named Elena Varga, and her story, written in the invisible ink of stolen light, was one of pure, unadulterated genius. Elena Varga, according to her own hidden words, was not merely Javier Montes' apprentice. She was his secret engine, a brilliant self-taught chemist and artist from a poor village. She had come to Montes as a protégé, but had quickly surpassed him in her understanding of color theory and pigment creation. The journal told a story of a silent, symbiotic relationship. Elena, hidden away in this studio, was the alchemist, the innovator, the true source of the Montes magic that had taken the art world by storm. Montes was the vessel, the celebrity, the brand. He gave her a laboratory. She gave him a legacy. Alex read, utterly captivated, as Elena detailed her life's obsession, the creation of a perfect, stable, luminous blue, a blue that captured the exact color of the Mediterranean Sea at dusk, a color she called Las Honditas Sunken Light. Her entries were a whirlwind of scientific brilliance and artistic passion. October 1926. 1. Entry glowed. The copper molecule is the key, but it is unstable. It oxidizes, it dulls, it dies. Javier tells me to abandon this foolishness. He says true genius lies in the brushstroke, not in the powder. He does not understand. The brushstroke is the voice. The pigment is the soul. I will not abandon it. Then, a breakthrough. May 1927. Light? The answer was light, all along. By stabilizing the chlorinated molecule with a photosensitive resina binder that cures and locks. Its structure, only when exposed to a specific wavelength of sunlight becomes permanent. It holds the light within itself. It is not just a pigment. It is a light trap. It is the sea in a jar. I have done it. This was it, the answer to the chemical anachronism. Elena Varga hadn't just invented thalocyanine blue 7 years early. She had invented a version of it that was, in many ways, more advanced, more poetic. A pigment born from a perfect marriage of chemistry and the coastal Spanish sun. As Alex delved deeper into the journal, he began to feel the ghost's presence in the room change. The fleeting, startling flashes of blue were gone. The unnerving reflection in the glass did not return. Instead, a new kind of presence emerged. A quiet, sorrowful, and deeply personal atmosphere settled over the studio. He felt, more than saw, a gentle, melancholy watchfulness. The ghost of Elena was no longer trying to get his attention. She was now standing vigil as he read her life story. He felt her relief. He felt her grief. The footage shows him pausing several times, looking up from the journal into the empty room and whispering, "I know. I'm sorry. I know." He was no longer speaking to himself. The story in the journal then took a dark, inevitable turn. Elena wrote of the first time Montes used her luz hundida in a major work. It was a small detail in a landscape, but the critics were mesmerized by it. They called the color revolutionary. They called it Montes blue. January 1928, Elena wrote, the blue words seeming to pulse with a new, colder light. Javier presented La Mirada del Mar in Madrid today. The papers are calling it his masterpiece. They write pages about the soulfulness of his blue. His blue. He stood on the stage and spoke of his solitary struggle in his studio, his battle to capture the essence of the sea. He never once mentioned my name. When I confronted him, he laughed. He told me, "The world needs a master, Elena, not a clever village girl. Your genius is my property now." That was our arrangement. The betrayal was absolute. But the worst was yet to come. The final entries of the hidden journal were written with a fading, unsteady hand. Elena wrote of a sudden, persistent cough, a fever that would not break, a weakness in her limbs. She wrote of Montes bringing her special teas, insisting she not see a doctor in the village, telling her he would care for her himself. March 1928. The weakness is worse. The blue under my own fingernails is now darker than the pigment in the jars. Javier is kind, but his eyes, when he looks at me, he does not see a person. He sees a loose end. He sees a secret that is still breathing. I am afraid. I have written all I can. I will hide this journal in the light itself. If you are reading this, it means he did not find it. It means he did not win. Do not let my color die with me. It was meant for the world. It was my light. It was the last word was an unfinished, trailing line of glowing blue, as if her strength had failed her in the middle of her final sentence. That was the last entry. Alex stared at the page, the terrible, sickening truth washing over him. This wasn't just a story of stolen genius. It was a story of a slow, methodical murder, carried out with a cup of tea and a patient, monstrous ambition. He had not just found the secret of a pigment. He had found the confession of a ghost and the evidence of a crime. He carefully closed the journal, the weight of its truth feeling heavier than stone, and as he looked up into the twilight, filling the studio, he saw her, not as a reflection, not as a flicker, but standing in the center of the room, a complete, stable, and heartbreakingly solid apparition of a young woman, her form composed of pure, shimmering, sunken light. She was looking directly at him, and in her spectral eyes, there was not anger. There was only a single, silent, 70-year-old plea. Chapter 5. The People's Pigment. The haunting was over. The ghost of Elena Varga had finally shown her entire story to the one person who could understand it. The spectral pleas, the tricks of light, the hidden journal, it was all a carefully constructed breadcrumb trail leading to this single, terrible truth. She hadn't been haunting the studio in anger. She had been guarding her confession, waiting for a witness. And now, she had one. The weight of that silent contract, passed from a ghost to a man of science, settled upon Alex's shoulders with the force of a physical blow. The apparition faded, leaving him alone in the dark. The heavy leather journal in his hands, feeling less like an artifact and more like a sacred charge. He knew what he had to do. He packed his equipment, but this time, he also packed the journal. He left the studio, locking the heavy wooden door behind him, sealing the silent, empty space once more. As he drove away from that lonely cliff top, he told me he looked in his rearview mirror. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a flicker of luminous blue light in the studio's great window. A final, silent farewell. Back in the sterile, rational world of Madrid, the battle began. Armed with his irrefutable data, the photographs of the hidden journal, and his own first-hand account, Alex presented his findings to the board of the Prado Museum. The meeting took place in a hushed, wood-paneled room, the air thick with the scent of old money and institutional power. They listened in stunned silence as he laid out the entire story, the chemical anachronism, the spectral encounters, the secret diary of Elena Varga, and the chilling accusation of plagiarism and murder against Spain's most celebrated modern artist. When he finished, there was not outrage. There was not a call for justice. There was only a cold, heavy silence. The director of the museum, a man whose entire life was dedicated to preserving the legacy of artists like Montes, finally spoke. His words were not a denial of the evidence. They were a confirmation of a far more brutal truth. "Mr. Reyes," he said, his voice laced with a weary cynicism, "what you have discovered is unfortunate. But Javier Montes is not a man. He is a billion-dollar industry. He is a pillar of our national identity. To tarnish his name would cause a catastrophic collapse in the art market. It would delegitimize collections around the world. It would be an act of cultural vandalism. Your evidence, while compelling, will be buried. For the good of the institution, this story ends in this room." It was a devastating, soul-crushing verdict. The same system of power and influence that had allowed Montes to erase Elena in 1928 was still in place, stronger than ever. They offered Alex a generous check and a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad it would have made a lawyer weep. They were buying his silence. They were going to bury Elena Varga all over again. Alex walked out of that museum, leaving their money and their threats on the table. He was heartbroken and furious. He had failed her. The ghost's plea had fallen on deaf ears, deafened by the roar of money and power. He sat for hours in a small cafe, the journal in his bag, a weight against his back. And it was there, staring at a young artist sketching in a notebook, that he finally understood Elena's last words. "Do not let my color die with me." It was meant for the world. He realized the museum, the critics, the auction houses, they were never the right audience. Elena's ghost didn't want revenge. She didn't want Montes's name destroyed. She wanted her creation to live. She wanted her gift to be given. And in that moment, Alex knew how to honor her. If the institutions wouldn't listen, he would speak directly to the creators. He did not leak the story to the press. He did not try to fight a legal battle he could never win. He did something far more powerful. He went back to his lab and, using Elena's own hidden notes, he perfectly recreated her Luz Hundida. Then, he built a simple open-source website. He didn't tell the story of the murder or the ghost. He simply posted the complete chemical formula with step-by-step instructions for anyone to use, for free. He named the pigment Varga Blue, and in the description, he wrote only a single sentence: a revolutionary pigment. Developed in 1927 by the brilliant chemist and artist Elena Varga, is now given freely to the world, as was her wish. He didn't share it with the mainstream media. He posted the link in niche online communities, forums for independent paintmakers, subreddits for chemists, blogs for working artists. He gave the secret not to the powerful, but to the passionate. The response was slow at first, then explosive. Artists and chemists around the world began to synthesize the pigment. They were mesmerized by its stability, its depth, its unique, light-capturing luminosity. Small, independent art supply companies began producing Varga Blue, and it quickly became a sensation. A cult classic loved for its quality and its mysterious open-source origins. The ghost of Elena Varga was finally exorcised, not by a ritual, but by an act of radical generosity. Her name is now whispered with reverence in studios and labs around the world. Her color, her soul, is now in the hands of thousands of artists, creating new beauty, fulfilling her true legacy. Javier Montes still hangs in the Prado, a silent, hollow monument to a celebrated lie. But Elena Varga, Elena is alive and well, present in every brushstroke of her impossible, beautiful, and finally, free, shade of blue. History is filled with ghosts like Elena Varga, silent partners, forgotten innovators, brilliant minds, whose light was stolen and hidden away. Here at Crimson Tales, we believe that the brightest truths are often found in the darkest shadows. If you believe that every stolen story deserves to be told, and that a legacy is more powerful than a lie, then join us, subscribe to the channel, and help us bring these beautiful, forgotten colors back into the light.